Welcome to our webinar. We're so excited to have you join us today. By way of quick introduction, my name is Nicole. I'm the COO here at Strut. If you don't know who we are, Strut provides outsourced support and strategic guidance to venture capital firms in areas such as operations, marketing and communications, events, CFO services, investor relations and fundraising, platform, and HR and talent. Today, we're going to be hearing from Vish on some really great recruiting and onboarding best practices. Whether you are in charge of hiring in your venture capital firm or own that part of the process, or you're helping your portfolio companies navigate these pieces, the best practices that we'll go over today will be applicable across the board. Too often, small firms and companies, we see many missteps happen on the recruiting and onboarding front that end up costing somewhere in the ballpark of six figures, as many organizational researchers have found. We all know you have limited time, resources, bandwidth, and it's really tempting to just slap together a quick job description and throw it out on LinkedIn in hopes that you catch a few decent candidates. This is never a recipe for success, and time after time, we see the wrong candidates get placed, which either leads to a termination and a continued drain on resources, or you settle for suboptimal performance. And today we want to help you avoid that by sharing with you how to have a stellar recruiting process and how to set up your new hires for success. A couple housekeeping notes. This will be recorded, and we will send out the recording post-event. We would love to have you say hi in the chat box and tell us where you're from. We will save some time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to submit your questions either throughout the webinar or at the end, and we'll try to get to them as best as we can. And then you're welcome to take some notes, but do know that we are going to be sending out a one-pager that kind of covers all of this, all of the topics that Vish is covering. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Vish for a quick intro on herself, and then she will get right into it.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name is Vishwa Patel. I go by Vish for short. I'm based in Atlanta, and my background is in recruiting and HR. I've been on the agency and consultancy side of things, but I've also been in-house for small companies and startups that are either experiencing steady to high growth. So I'm really excited today to share a few things I've picked up along the way that have really helped me and the teams I've worked with to set up a solid recruiting and onboarding practice. And apologies in advance if my voice goes in and out. I woke up with a bit of a sore throat, but I've got my water, I have my tea, and we should be good to go. Before we dive into the content, just a quick overview on the agenda. First, we will talk about recruiting and then move on to the onboarding side of things. And then I do want to spend some time discussing how you can measure the effectiveness of your recruiting and onboarding practice. We'll highlight some key takeaways and then have some room at the end for Q&A. All right, so recruiting best practices. There's a lot that I'll be going over today, but just know that this is not a one-size-fits-all type of situation. It really welcomes customization, but there are a few things to keep in mind. The first thing I have here is defining job requirements and qualifications. So what will this position main responsibilities be? What will this person have full ownership of? Who will they be partnering with regularly? Managers should really consider aligning with their hiring teams on the position details beforehand, and also try to consider transferable skills. Is the right candidate maybe in a different industry or currently in a different position? There's many situations where somebody has obtained certain skills that can really work with your team and the industry that you're a part of. And don't forget to look into compensation and the growth potential for this position. This should be seen as a career opportunity that fosters growth. And another main thing to keep in mind is communication. Communication is key. A new job position should not be a shock to internal team members Be vocal about the new headcount and what exactly you're looking for. And don't be afraid to ask for help when it comes to the interview process. I'll touch on this in a bit more later. The next bullet here is create an engaging job description and employer branding. So when it comes to a job description, there's a few key points to keep in mind. A clear title, company overview, a summary of the job, bullets on the responsibilities and qualifications, and then it doesn't hurt to include benefits and perks that will be offered as well. Be sure to keep it gender neutral and use keywords to help you with search engine optimization. You also should add your equal opportunity statement. This essentially is a general statement that shares your commitment to fair and equal hiring practices. You can find a standard one on any HR website, but I encourage you to take a look at what other companies are doing, what they're writing for the statement, maybe other competitors. You do have room to add your own customization, your own flavor to things that kind of showcase your company's personality. And don't forget to look into your local pay transparency laws. These vary from state to state, city to city, and you want to make sure you're abiding by these, because if you don't, then you could be fined a penalty charge. So this is something that you can definitely look up online. And then third bullet, sourcing candidates. This has to be an active position or process rather. The truth is, posting a job and waiting for the right candidate isn't going to cut it. You can do this through a variety of different ways: job boards, social media, referrals, and various other channels. And this is where an applicant tracking system, or ATS for short, is going to be extremely useful, because it'll allow you to manage your candidate process a whole lot better. Everything from posting the job position to getting it pushed out to other job boards, and also managing the interview process, collecting feedback, and other data points, which I'll touch on in a later slide. And don't forget to network. The power of networking is huge. Leverage your LinkedIn and other networking channels and groups that you're a part of. Be vocal, like I mentioned earlier, about this position. It can really help you get introduced to the right candidate. And then we move on to screening candidates, which is everything from resume reviews to interviews, on-site, remote, phone screens. So you want to make sure that during this process, you are prepping your hiring team beforehand on the job details and what the hiring process looks like, what exactly their role is in interviewing. I've seen many times before where an interviewer is added randomly to an interview with no background on the role at all. And it creates a messy interview situation. Interviewing is a form of employer branding. So it's really important that your hiring team understands what they're going to keep a lookout for during the interview process. Make sure you promote timely feedback and documentation, and interview debriefs as well. Getting together with your team after each round of interviews is really helpful, because you guys can discuss what exactly the experience was like to speak to this candidate, and if somebody missed anything in general, positive or negative. And then probably the most exciting yet nerve-wracking part is making a job offer and closing the deal. There's various ways you can go about this, and it's going to change. Different things tend to pop up during this step. But the other thing that you want to keep in mind here is how you want to draft the job offer to make sure it includes details that will be helpful for the candidate to consider. So once you consider things like start date, salary, and a reporting structure, make sure you extend a verbal, have a discussion, and be open to answering questions, and prepare for negotiation. Once that process is done, send out a written offer, and fingers crossed that they accept. All right, let me move on to the next slide. I want to take some time here to show how this can be effective for both VCs and portfolios. So venture capital firms, they tend to be smaller teams typically. So they will really benefit from fractional recruiting managers to cover process best practices and dive deep into specialty experience plus junior hires. So this is also helpful with smaller budgets and when it doesn't necessarily make sense to invest in a tool like an applicant tracking system. And then with portfolio companies, startups, depending on the growth goal, it's essential to have a recruiting infrastructure set in place to scale. So what I mean by this is having various tools and processes like an ATS, an HR system, performance management systems, onboarding, training, implementation, DEI, all of that good stuff. But if you're in a situation where you're not necessarily ready to bring on a full-time recruiting or HR hire, fractional recruiting managers can really help with this because they can dive into whenever you do have this need. Maybe recruiting is extremely seasonal for your company. It's not constant throughout the year. So a fractional recruiting manager can really help with this. All right, and now let's move on to onboarding best practices. Starting with pre-onboarding, which entails a lot of housekeeping items, system setup and accesses, ordering equipment. It's also where managers align with internal HR team members or various other team members on other back-end to-dos. So to avoid reinventing the wheel here, it's helpful to create a checklist that includes all the items that must be completed beforehand and before a new hire start date, essentially. And make sure you have time to prepare material. This includes training material, orientation, setting up regular meetings and one-on-ones. I know that during an offer stage, it's really exciting and you may be extending an offer to somebody who's available immediately. Instead of having them join the day after they sign or maybe that following Monday, give yourself at least a good 2 weeks so that way you do have time to take a breather and prepare. I know for smaller teams, small VC firms and small startups, you're really trying to fill your head count and get things going. But if you're not ready on the onboarding side, it can really create a messy situation and stress to both the new hire and manager and respective team members. And the onboarding process, which is orientation, training, and integrating into the company culture. One thing I want to call out here is managers do not have to do it all. Leverage your team, see if there's other people who you work with regularly that can help you out when it comes to trainings, especially. Sometimes it may feel like you have no other choice but to do it yourself because you are part of a small team. But when you are starting to get to a point to include other team members as part of the onboarding process for your new hire, go ahead and do that. This also allows you to have your team exercise their training and mentorship skills and will help you with future new hires as well. Some important factors to keep in mind: communicating expectations and setting goals. So consider a 30, 60, 90 plan and have regular one-on-ones with your new hire. One-on-ones can start off frequently in the beginning and then dwindle down to whatever seems appropriate. And you want to build a culture of inclusion and diversity. So there's various approaches to this depending on company size, growth, etc. But an immediate way you can do this is by including your new hire in key conversations where they can voice their opinions, provide feedback, and be given a chance to learn. Exposure to various parts of your organization is a great opportunity for growth. So be sure to include your new hire. And then always be open to providing ongoing support and feedback. This is very important as new hires settle into their positions. We aren't asking managers to handhold, but instead to foster an environment where employees feel comfortable asking for guidance. Okay, so moving on to measuring the effectiveness of recruiting and onboarding. Key performance indicators, which are KPIs for short, are essential in assessing the success of recruiting and onboarding. So you can start by collecting recruiting data. This includes things like the source of your hire, time to fill positions, time spent interviewing, rejection and withdrawal reasons, and the offer acceptance rate. An applicant tracking system is very useful here because it'll be collecting this information for you on the back end and providing insights and charts for you to take a look at regularly to see if there's anything that needs to be adjusted. The other way that I've seen applicant tracking systems help out here is by sending out interview process surveys. This is regarding the candidate experience. And like I mentioned earlier, the candidate experience is a form of employer branding. So you want to make sure it's positive. A best way to gauge how that's going is by sending out this interview process survey. And you can pinpoint and see what exactly is popping up. If there's a pain point that's showing up consistently, there's your chance to address it during the interview process. And then one other thing that has been cool that I've used in the past is to help with my sourcing efforts is to collect equality monitoring data. This is directly on the application, completely voluntary, and it's asking about gender, race, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, etc. And the way that you can use this information is, for example, say a startup is looking for a mid-level software engineer. And after 3 weeks of that position being open, you realize that most of the applicants are cisgender males. So then this may push you to post the job in various groups like women in tech, minorities who code, those type of things to kind of diversify your candidate pool. And then on the onboarding side, you can send out a survey after 90 days, and this is to both managers and new hires, just to see like how things are going, if something is working or not, and if there needs to be some changes made sooner rather than later. Let me just. And then moving on to second to last bullet, evaluating the quality of new hires. So this is going to be both qualitative and quantitative data. You can do this by analyzing performance metrics, collecting manager feedback, new hire self-reviews, and checking on the time to productivity and retention rate. Now, how can you do this effectively with no tools at all? First thing you want to do is establish the goals that make sense for your new hire and for your team as a whole. And then leverage free online tools like onmonday.com or Asana. They have a wide variety of templates you can utilize for free, and it's really good for project management in general. These platforms can provide structure and visibility into a new hire's performance, and be sure not to neglect the power of one-on-one meetings. Also, the support from your external team members. You really don't have to do it all by yourself. And if recruiting is more of a seasonal thing and you're on a budget, try to consider fractional services, maybe working with a third-party agency or a consultant to manage and maintain this for you. If you work with a third-party recruiter, they can manage the full recruiting process for you and then give you weekly or bi-weekly insights as to what the hiring process is looking like and any if there needs to be any changes. And then finally, be open to identifying areas for improvement and continuous learning. So encourage feedback from new hires themselves. They can provide valuable insights into the effectiveness of your onboarding process. And be sure to adapt your practices on feedback and evaluation results. Data is most valuable when you utilize it to make certain improvements. All right, moving on. Key takeaways. All right, so as we near the end of our webinar, let's recap on a few key takeaways from our discussion today. And my goal is for these to serve as an important reminder for implementing best practices in recruiting, onboarding, and evaluation as well. The first one I have here is define job requirements, qualifications, and growth potential. Managers should align with their hiring teams to ensure everyone understands the role and its expectations. Consider transferable skills and the career advancement opportunity for the role. And then communication. Effective communication is crucial throughout the entire recruitment and onboarding process. It helps set expectations, avoid surprises, and ensures a smooth transition for both the internal team and new hire. You also want to develop a thoughtful onboarding and training process. A well-structured onboarding program can greatly contribute to the success of new hires. It includes orientation, training, and integration into the company culture. And be intentional in creating an onboarding experience that sets your new hires up for success. Improvement and continuous learning, my last point over here. As with any process, there's always room for improvement. So embrace feedback, identify areas of growth, and implement changes to enhance your recruiting, onboarding, and evaluation process. And remember, there's no end goal here. Hence why this is a continuous learning process. Things will be changing as time goes on, and you want to make sure you are doing whatever you can to create an environment where change is welcome, where the presence of differences are welcome, and also where you can learn constantly as a team member and as a manager. And yeah, there you have it. These are some ways VCs and startups can set a solid foundation for their hiring practice. I really enjoyed going over these topics with you all today. I hope it was helpful. And now let's move on to some Q&A.
Thanks, Vish. This was great. As mentioned, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A chat box. A couple of questions to get started. Vish, how can technology and digital platforms enhance our recruitment and onboarding efforts? Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, sure. So I think I mentioned this a few times, an applicant tracking system. That is a tool that is going to streamline your whole candidate management process. To give you a more concrete example, you can get a job description posted within that system. It'll then push it out to various different job boards. You can include other job boards that you pay a subscription to, and then you can move forward with the rest of your team and setting up interviews. It connects with everybody's calendars. It sends reminders to gain feedback, so that way it's documented in one spot. And it's just a great tool in general for sourcing, because as time goes on, that database will be there with a bunch of different candidates, and you can always go back to that and see if somebody who applied to a role maybe 2 months ago who didn't necessarily get it might be interested for a future one, right? So you can always reach out to them. You have their contact info. So yeah, I would definitely leverage and try to invest in an applicant tracking system if you're having consistent hiring going on. Even if you have a 1 to 2 month gap, it's good to have an ATS so that way you're ready to go when you are ready to hire. And then of course, project management tools really help during the onboarding process. You can, for example, in Asana, create a checklist for onboarding and add whoever is necessary to satisfy certain parts of the pre-onboarding process, especially.
That's great. And then as a follow-up to that, I know a lot of people are on really tight budgets. Are there any kind of budget-friendly or free options for applicant tracking systems?
Yeah, I don't know any off the top of my head, but there are a few. I would say you want to check out 2 to 3 before you make a decision. And when it comes to costs for ATSs, they tend to go by your company size. So if you're part of a smaller team, but you see a really great applicant tracking system that would be perfect for your team, work with the sales consultant there to find a size that makes sense for your company size, and make sure they are clear about how that pricing will change once you get to a certain number of employees.
That's great. And then do you have any recommendations that you personally
Yeah.
like?
So on the agency side, I've used Bullhorn, but for in-house, I would say Greenhouse and Lever have been my top. They've been really great. Another more budget-friendly one that I've used at a recent startup that was really good for that time, we were experiencing quite a bit of growth, is Pinpoint. They're based in the UK. They're also very user-friendly. And the one thing that I liked about that platform is you have to make sure your hiring team collaborates with you on these tools. And it was very easy to do that.
Great. And then a question from one of the audience members. Do you consider pre-employment testing through a firm like Leadership Alliance, such as Chapman & Co.?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you consider any pre-employment testing through a firm like Leadership Alliance?
I'm not too familiar with that.
Okay. Maybe some follow-up to that, Rod, would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
You touched briefly on check-ins with your new hires. What would you recommend as a good cadence for that?
Yeah, so what I think has worked really well is initially with new hires, maybe the first month, month and a half, having regular one-on-ones, especially if it's a junior new hire. I would say even as often as 2 to 3 times a week, but then you do want to dwindle it down to maybe once a week, once every other week. The point of more frequent is not for you to show how to do every single thing, but it's also to give them some space to experiment on their own and showcase what they're learning to you. So one thing that I used to do for a couple team members of mine is on Friday check-ins after a Monday and Wednesday check-in is have them share with me something new that they've learned and something new that they're directly implementing in their day-to-day work. This was really great for the first month. And then we were able to kind of like decrease it to once a week and then once every other week.
When you get into that regular cadence, is there some kind of loose format or certain things that you like to touch on?
Yeah, so with a new hire specifically, if I am conducting regular training, especially the first couple of weeks, I would like to have an agenda that addresses how the training went for the new hire and how they're using that information actively right now. And also leaving some room for them to ask questions, any questions at all. It doesn't even have to be related to their work, but I encourage them to always have at least 2 to 3 questions, whether it be the work, industry, or something random that they've noticed about the company.
That's great. Switching gears a little bit, I know, especially with VC firms, a lot of times, the hiring managers or the GPs, they want to make their first finance hire, but they don't know exactly what this person is going to be doing. How do you communicate this in a way to the candidate that doesn't scare them away?
Yeah, that happens so much, especially in smaller companies, smaller firms, and startups. Many times, the next few hires you're making are the first of their kind. So you yourself may be hiring a finance person and you just don't know what that entails, but you know you need one. You have to be very clear about this during the interview process. During the interview process, let the candidate know that, look, this is the first finance manager. We really don't know what we're doing here. We need help. This person is really building and hands-on. And if you are clear about that from the beginning, that should be more than enough. You can sense when something like that makes a candidate uncomfortable, or even by the information they're giving about their background. Maybe they've been in situations where they always had a team under them and a lot of their role was delegating and just overseeing. They might not be the right person for you, and you're going to have to call that early on. So just gauge that during the interview process and be honest with yourself. It's better to take the time to find the right person versus rushing into filling that role.
Couldn't agree more. Yes,
Yes.
that's great. Well, I think that is all the Q&A for today. Thank you everyone again so much for joining us. We hope you learned a few new things and can go back and implement them into your recruiting and onboarding processes. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will be following up with a post-webinar note that will include Vish's contact details, a link to this webinar in case you missed it or want to rewatch it, and then a one-pager. I know Vish covered a lot today, and it was a lot to kind of take in. So she's going to provide kind of a one-pager overview of everything she covered. So we will send that out shortly. And thanks again for joining us. We'll be doing more of these, so stay tuned as we bring in more of our experts.
Thanks everyone.
Vish.
Bye.
Bye.